Tonight we begin a five-part series on the fastest growing recreational drug in the United States. American smokers are turning over a new leaf. Those leaves, however, don't come from Liggett & Myers or R.J. Reynolds in Virginia. They come from marijuana or pot fields in Colombia, Mexico, Hawaii, and other points across the globe. Marijuana has become so widespread that virtually anyone is likely to be a user, although the majority of users are under 40. Modest figures indicate there are a minimum of 25 million pot smokers in this country. Assuming they consume a modest amount of 1 ounce per month, we are looking at the smoking of 640,000 pounds of grass every month. Nearly all of it is brought into the country illegally. The average wholesale price of a ton of grass is $600,000, indicating gross sales of more than $4 billion a year at the wholesale level. The Federal Anti-Narcotics Network claims the figure is somewhat lower because of seizures and busts, which claim about 1 out of every 10 tons of grass brought into the United States. Opponents say there is no such thing as safe marijuana. Others say the most serious dangers associated with the cannabis products stem from abusive laws against it and misguided or vindictive government and police authorities. During the 1930s, all states began to ban marijuana. It was classified as a narcotic, and users or pushers were subject to severe penalties if caught with the drug.
Here is the most tragic case. Yes, I remember. Just a young boy. Under the influence of the drug, he killed his entire family with an axe. Then there is the most vicious type of case. Here, in Michigan, a young girl, 17 years old, a reefer smoker, taken in a raid in the company with 5 young men.
But by the 1960s, marijuana had entered the mainstream of American life. Some states have now decriminalized it, but will it ever be legalized? Are penalties too harsh? Is it safe or harmful? Does it have any medicinal properties that can be beneficial? Are there problems with the billions of untaxed American dollars floating through the economy due to illicit smuggling operations? These are some of the areas we'll continue exploring in marijuana, the billion-dollar industry. We continue now with our series on marijuana, this country's fastest growing recreational drug. The Drug Enforcement Administration, the main government arm dealing with illegal drugs coming into this country, says America's taste for marijuana is no longer just a law enforcement issue. According to the DEA, it has become an economic headache, a balance of payments problem.
I think it's been both a law enforcement problem and an economic problem. The amount of money that is being made from marijuana is in the billions. Monies are going to the Caymans, the Bahamas, other foreign countries, and of course being spent in the United States purchasing businesses and being used to further the narcotic trade.
According to the government, the money supply in Miami has increased 180% in the last 3 years with the dope trafficking boom. A joint FBI-DEA task force in Miami this year traced $1 billion now on deposit in dope dealers' accounts in 36 Miami area banks. The Federal Reserve Bank says that's not so bad.
To the extent that that's going on, that reduces the money supply in the United States. And that's its only effect.
Does that hurt us?
Well, in the current situation, probably not, because we've got a generally excessive amount of money in the United States economy right now. And if the inflation keeps eroding its value to the extent that we can induce a foreign central bank to sit there and hold it, they're absorbing all the loss.
The DEA says there are as many as 3 million young people who supplement their incomes by dealing quantities of marijuana. If you view the whole business from the person who buys a boatload to the young man or woman who buys a liter or an ounce, the volume of marijuana is staggering. It means there is a good chance marijuana does a volume of more than $45 billion a year. If that's true, General Motors is number 1, Exxon is number 2, marijuana is number 3. You may or may not know it, but there is another economic facet to the marijuana business. And while the grass is illegal, the paraphernalia industry is the legitimate tip of the get-high business. Head shops, thousands of them, have cropped up in every city in the country. Pipes, roach clips, multicolored rolling paper, and the like bring in annual revenues of $350 million. In the past 10 years, marijuana users have seen fit to purchase 5 billion packages of rolling paper. Dope paraphernalia dealers don't feel the pinch of the law, but they are not looked upon with favor because of their contribution to helping people get high on illegal drugs. What about legalization and decriminalization? What about penalties? Are they too harsh? We'll look into that tomorrow night at 10 when we continue our series on marijuana, the billion-dollar industry.
40 billion.
We'll continue our series tonight on the fastest growing recreational drug in this country, marijuana. Penalties for marijuana possession vary from state to state, and two important words to understand are decriminalization and legalization. Decriminalization means that having the drug for personal use is not a felony, just a simple misdemeanor, punishable by a fine, just like a speeding ticket. 11 states have decriminalized: Oregon, Maine, Colorado, California, Ohio, Minnesota, Mississippi, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, and Alaska. Had Missouri been one of those states, Jerry Mitchell wouldn't be in Algora Reformatory now. He was sentenced to 12 years for selling a little more than $5 worth of marijuana. The sentence was later reduced to 7 years.
I don't think that selling a small quantity of marijuana, which I'm sure millions of marijuana smokers do every day, I don't think that's the same as rape or other serious crimes.
How does it make you feel when there are some people who get involved in armed robbery and certain crimes like that, and they get less time than you were given?
Well, I don't like it, and I would think a person who was paying taxes wouldn't like it either.
Governor Teasdale had the opportunity to commute Mitchell's sentence, but here's how he responded earlier this year.
Such pardons, generally, should be granted only in the most extreme cases, when it has been determined beyond any reasonable doubt that the rights of the individual have been violated or the legal system abused. This is not such a case.
President Carter favors a modified form of decriminalization. Senators Birch Bayh, Henry Jackson, and Frank Church, among others, favor decriminalization for possession of small amounts of marijuana for personal use. Gerald Ford, Nelson Rockefeller, George Wallace, and Ronald Reagan, among others, prefer that current laws remain as they are.
There are many more states in which the chances of decriminalization are very, very good in the immediate future, in the next year or so, and I would say that Missouri is among them.
A misunderstood question is the one of legalization.
Because I think marijuana will eventually be legalized.
Is that Normal's position on it?
Normal's position is that the concept of legalization deserves an awful lot of study. Not that it ought to be done right now. I don't think it ought to be done right now. I think there's a lot of advantages to it. There may well be some disadvantages to it too. So before we go plunging into it, let's study it and let's really find out what all the dimensions of it are.
The form of legalization of the drug is a misnomer. It is covered by the Single Convention of 1961 as well as the Food and Drug Administration law. So you're never going to see a drug or a crude drug from this plant legal.
I think legalizing would be unrealistic in view of our treaty obligations. I think it would be unwise in view of the health hazards. And I don't think it would accomplish the objective, as some state, that it would get organized crime out of the market.
There's a very important point to remember. Prohibition of alcohol was government imposed. The question of legalization of marijuana is moot. The United States, along with 107 other countries, entered into a treaty under the guise of the United Nations in 1961, banning illegal drugs like these marijuana cigarettes. So it would take 108 countries to repeal the current marijuana laws dealing with legalization, and that does not seem likely. Another interesting fact, did you know that each leaf of a marijuana plant has more than 350 different chemical properties, and some appear to have some medicinal advantages? I learned that at a government marijuana pot farm, where some of the strongest grass in the world is grown. And we're going to show it to you tomorrow night at 10, when we continue our series on marijuana, the billion-dollar industry. Bruce?
I think you better point out where you got these in case there's some people.
Well, these cigarettes and this cannabis come from the St. Louis Police Department. It came as evidence, and they sprayed it with diazinon, which they put on certain pesticides. And
make sure that it didn't disappear from here.
Nobody touches it. If anybody touches it, they're in bad trouble. Marijuana, a billion-dollar industry. We continue our series tonight. Who would think that the green grass of Mississippi would become some of the strongest marijuana grown in the world. I'm standing in the midst of 5.5 acres of marijuana. No, we're not in Mexico, and we're not in Colombia. We're in the United States' only legal pot farm, and it's in Oxford, Mississippi. Here it is, a government-sponsored pot farm. Marijuana fields of Colombian, Mexican, Hawaiian, Russian, Turkish, and almost every other variety of grass to be found. The Growing and Subsequent Research Project is headed up by Dr. Carlton Turner.
We're here to study the plant, to study the chemistry of it, and to study the properties of those isolated compounds. Whether or not they're beneficial to mankind or harmful to mankind is not our job. That's the job of the other people involved in the field. As far as being an overt program to show beneficial effects is to show the biological properties. If they happen to be beneficial, that's fine. If they're not, they're not. But let me state categorically and emphatically that you're never going to see the crude drug marijuana dispensed, no matter how many states, quote, legalize it, unquote. It just will not happen. There are more carcinogenic compounds in the smoke of one marijuana cigarette than there are carcinogenic compounds in the smoke of a regular tobacco cigarette. There are more tars in this product here than you would find in tobacco cigarettes. Marijuana does not have a clean bill of health. If you take this plant, this is the cannabis plant. From this cannabis plant, we get many different drugs. Marijuana is one of these drugs. And from marijuana, or from this cannabis plant, we know there are over 300 different individual chemicals. And of these 300-odd chemicals, some of these have different physiological properties on the body. Some alter the mind processes, some regulate, not to an extent that you would want as a medicinal agent, but have some effect on the heart and other systems of the body. But there are possibilities that some of the chemical components in this plant may give leads for medical purposes, but I do not want to give the false impression that you're going to go down to your neighborhood pharmacist and get a joint or marijuana. I don't think marijuana will ever be used as a medicinal agent because of the properties associated with these different chemicals. They fluctuate hourly and daily. Smoking is the worst possible way to take this material into the body because of the variables associated with it. So what most people do is they take delta-9, which is a single cannabinoid from this plant. They say this is synthetic marijuana, therefore whatever this delta-9 THC will do, marijuana will do. And that's basically the reason. If you take the analytical data of the crude drugs that you give, or the drugs you give, and look at that closely and compare that to what is being used in the marijuana research, you would throw probably 80-85% of the papers in the trash can. People have the impression that marijuana is a singular substance, when indeed it is not a singular substance. So yes, you would want to take an individual chemical pure. And let me use a correlation here. We take cyclamates. We took the cyclamates off of the market in the late 60s because of one report of where they had caused cancer in laboratory animals. That is a single substance, the cyclamate. We take this plant, which is a complex chemical factory, produces a drug we call marijuana, which may have over 300 different chemicals, which we know it produces cancerous cells in animals and under certain conditions. We know it has more carcinogenic compounds in the smoke than does tobacco. You can go on and on and on. Now you will have people saying that, well, this one maybe should be on the market where cyclamates shouldn't. Since the one report on cyclamates, there have been 300 reports that have not been able to document the carcinogenic properties, and yet cyclamates are not on the market. And these same people that are pushing to keep cyclamates off the market are pushing to keep this on it. And it's basically an abdication of the scientific community to respond to the need of the public and say, here is what the crude drug is. Let's look at what we're giving, and let's be absolute certain in what we're saying about the drug. We have too many self-made experts in the field. Our idea here is to produce as much knowledge as we can about this plant, which produces the crude drugs that are used by man, and to make that knowledge available to the public.
So, according to Dr. Turner, marijuana can be harmful, but it appears to have beneficial medicinal qualities in some cases. But how does marijuana compare to other drugs, such as alcohol? We'll take a look at that tomorrow night at 10, when we continue our series on marijuana, the billion-dollar industry. We conclude our series on marijuana tonight with some new questions and some that should be re-examined. First, how does marijuana compare with another recreational drug, alcohol? If you are looking for that high, what would be better for you, physiologically speaking, to take?
I would have to say the bulk of the evidence at this point would favor the marijuana over the alcohol. I think if it was done in moderation, if you drank alcohol in moderation, marijuana in moderation, you'd probably have a trade-off. The danger, of course, is the potential with alcohol sucking you into much greater amounts being consumed, and that seems to be an insidious part of alcohol, which doesn't really seem to occur with marijuana.
So I think marijuana will eventually be legalized.
The form of legalization of the drug is a misnomer. It is covered by the Single Convention of 1961 as well as the Food and Drug Administration law, so you're never going to see a drug or a crude drug from this plant legal.
I think legalizing would be unrealistic in view of our treaty obligations. I think it would be unwise in view of the health hazards. And I don't think it would accomplish the objective, as some state, that it would get organized crime out of the market.
Some important facts. Marijuana has become such big business, the U.S. government is not only worried about the law enforcement issue concerning smuggling, but it is genuinely concerned about the billions of untaxed American dollars floating around this country and the rest of the world. Colombia, which grows most of the grass coming into this country, is beginning to deal with the problem in another way. It has told its Air Force to start shooting down unauthorized planes flying less than 7,000 feet over the Guajira Peninsula, where most of the marijuana fields are located. Now that's pretty harsh, but many countries are cooperating with the U.S. in trying to halt what could be this country's third biggest business. Some sources estimate $48 billion a year changes hands in the marijuana business. Do you know what that figure represents? $48 billion represents the total amount of dividends paid by all U.S. corporations annually. It's also the amount of money all Americans spend each year on gasoline and oil.
As far as using marijuana as a recreational drug in moderation, would you say that it is harmful or hazardous to your health?
No, I don't believe it is.
Do you have any messages for any other people out there who may be selling $5 worth of marijuana?
I think it's probably unwise to take and get involved in it, just for the simple reason is you can mess your life up quite a lot. Not in terms of what marijuana will do to you, but what in terms if you get caught with it, what that will do to you. Prisons are not nice places.
So the cold hard fact is that right or wrong, marijuana is illegal. To coin a phrase commonly used among marijuana smugglers, if you're going to do the crime, you'd better be prepared to do the time.